seriously, I leave for 10 days, basically 2 weekends, and I beg you not to burn things down. And as usual, when the sofa is out a little bit, things go crazy. So yeah, Trump assassination attempt and the nomination of JD Vance as Mr. Trump's VP pick. That's what we're gonna try to discuss a little bit, albeit a bit under duress. Let's explore. Hello everyone, welcome to the Freedom Alternative. First of all, I will have to mention that I'm doing this a little bit under duress. I've been nagged into oblivion to offer a take on this, even though I generally try to avoid making videos on breaking news. I'd rather let things stew for a little bit and think about it a little bit more and then offer commentary. I think there's plenty of YouTubers who already do commentary on current events and especially on breaking news. Not all of them do a good job, but a lot of them do. So there's that. But in any event, there's a heat wave here, so the only time I could actually videotape this without melting is at 5 something a.m., just like the next video. Yeah, let's try. So the assassination attempt. Well, first of all, it was real, and no amount of blue anon conspiracy theory can change that. And it was quite hilarious to see the floodgates of bad takes being open wide for everyone to enjoy. I mean, you gotta give it to the libs. They're not accustomed to observing things, so they had to basically take a page from the gutters of the internet and come up with the most ridiculous theories about how everything is a conspiracy, everything is staged, and so on, which is quite funny. I mean, at the end of the day, they're basically saying their own government staged. So yeah, that's funny. But, you know, conspiracy theories notwithstanding, you gotta admit that the memery was great. Regardless of whether you like Trump or not, regardless of whether you are one of those weird people who believe that it's unfortunate that the shooter missed or not, or whether you're normal, the memery was just absolutely great and totally worth exploring. I've placed quite a bit of those in the Freedom Alternative meme channel. But again, memery notwithstanding, the assassination attempt was real, and it is one of those events that could change history, but I'm also not entirely convinced that this one would. For the Europeans watching from afar, it seems like one of those huge events, like, oh my goodness, how could this happen? But from an American perspective, it's not really that uncommon. I mean, 1 in 11 presidents was assassinated, and 1 in 6 survived at least one assassination attempt. A statistic that I've seen is that now Trump is the second in all-time history of presidents to survive assassination attempts after Obama. So, you know, basically the job of the US president is one of the most hazardous, if not the most hazardous, the most dangerous on US soil. So from that perspective, yeah, I know it sounds very autistic or whatever, but seriously, for statistically speaking, it's one of those per capita arguments. It's not really quite surprising, isn't it? So considering that, there are reasons to believe that this assassination attempt may not have the effect that too many are assuming, because let's face it, the main assumption is that basically Trump won the election now, and it's all just a a slow march through institutions, if you want, like the first institution being the Republican Party itself, where he had to legally secure the nomination, which he did, and appoint a VP, which he did. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So, the basic assumption right now, even in diplomatic circles, is that, well, let's start getting ready for a Trump administration from January 25 onwards, because, well, let's face it, Mr. Biden is no longer a serious challenge, especially after his disastrous debate performance. And again, that assumption is not without its merits. Just in the last 7 years, we've had the assassination attempt on Jair Bolsonaro in the middle of the election campaign, which pretty much secured his victory, no matter how much the hard left in Brazil tried, and they did try, to make sure he doesn't win. Well, he did. And then we had the assassination attempt on Robert Fico, the Prime Minister of Slovakia, who prior to the assassination attempt was denigrated everywhere, and it was a huge scandal. How dare he create a coalition government and become Prime Minister again in Slovakia. After the assassination attempt, there was a rally around the flag type of phenomenon in the country, and now suddenly all of that slander, even in the foreign press, I mean, just look it up, prior to Robert Fico's assassination attempt, he was the Russophile, he was in Putin's pocket, he was an extremist, he was far right, even though he leads a center-left party in Slovakia. But don't let that stop you from, don't let that stop the media from slander. In any event, after the assassination attempt, all of that slander just poof, disappeared. Why? Because, well, it suddenly became unpopular to crap on a guy who got shot and spent quite some time in hospital, and, well, recently he went back to his duties, but didn't look quite good, let's put it this way. So these two examples being the most recent ones that I can remember. But by the same token, there have been presidents or people running for presidency in the US who survived an assassination attempt and lost. So there's that. Admittedly, the last one was over 100 years ago, so maybe things have changed a little bit, but what if they didn't? And that is the part that too many don't want to consider, because at the end of the day, the main operatives for the Democrats, they haven't given up. They're a bit dismayed, they're a bit unprepared. They didn't have the talking points prepared in case of such an event, even though they themselves, not just the operatives for the Democratic Party, but the liberal media and whatnot, they've all been calling for violence, and they've all been basically priming and seeding the public into a frenzy that would be then used to justify an assassination attempt. So from that perspective, they should have been more prepared, that's what I'm saying. But they weren't, so I guess there's that. So that's my main concern. I don't think Trump already won the election, but it's certainly he went up in polls in a way that wasn't the case when I published the last episode of the occasional podcast. Nevertheless, let us not forget that this is still July, so until November there's plenty of time, and if you haven't figured it out already, the public tends to have the memory of the jellyfish. And this is especially true in 2024 in a way that wasn't true in 1912 or whatever. Things that happened 6 months ago are out of collective memory already. Things that happened 8 years ago are in prehistory at this point. So 4 months until the election, 3 months and a half, that's a lot of time, and it's a lot of time for the public to either forget or to be groomed, pardon the phrasing, into forgetting or even into justifying it or thinking that it was probably not a big deal. So there's that. Now, to be fair, the exact same phenomenon works in JD Vance's favor as well, because as soon as Mr. Trump announced JD Vance as his VP pick, the usual suspects came out with statements made by Mr. Vance in 2016 or in 2015 or whatever, and yeah, the same phenomenon works in favor of JD Vance as well. Who the hell cares what JD Vance said 8 years ago? That's in prehistory. Nobody cares. Nobody of consequence anyway, and definitely not most of the electorate. So yeah, that's all I had to say on the assassination attempt, I think. Yeah, so on JD Vance, on one hand, it's that kind of nomination that doesn't really surprise me. I mean, at the end of the day, JD Vance's personality, forget about his ideas, his personality, him as a person, he's basically the younger version of Trump. His instincts are very populistic, not exactly conservative, not exactly liberal, a bit on the socialist side, quite frankly, on economics. I mean, the guy is in favor of natalist socialism. Yeah, he'll call it family encouragement policies or whatever, natalist socialism. Okay, he's in favor of all sorts of protectionist measures that have already failed everywhere else. But you know, it's the standard American arrogance. Just because a measure failed somewhere else doesn't mean we shouldn't try it because, well, we're Americans and we're special. Yeah, I'm sorry, the laws of economics aren't special for the United States. A dogshit measure will still fail, regardless of whether it's implemented in Stockholm or in Washington, D.C. So there's that. But in any event, his ideas notwithstanding, his personality, his JD Vance's personality, is so similar to Donald Trump that it's pretty much unsurprising that he picked JD Vance to run. And there are some advantages to that. I mean, again, if I had been part of the consultant team for Trump, I would have strongly advocated for Glenn Youngkin, mostly for the same reasons, mainly electoral reasons. I mean, Glenn Youngkin can access a type of electorate that Trump himself cannot, but so does JD Vance. And both of them are not, as I sometimes say on the Romanian channel, obzi și mort, right? So, you know, very old. JD Vance is, I think, 40 or 39, something like that. Glenn Youngkin is also not particularly old. So from that perspective, both of these men would have been a good pick from an electoral perspective. From other perspectives, I don't know. I can see the argument for Vivek as well. Not a big fan of Vivek myself, but I can see the argument for that. But in any event, what's done, it's done. JD Vance is Trump's VP pick. Some liberals are very happy with that choice because they think that it will harm him electorally. There is an argument for that as well because, well, JD Vance kind of underperformed in Ohio when he was elected to the US Senate. But by the same token, the personality of JD Vance is very appealing to the white working class, which is a key demographic that as a Republican you have to win, and you have to win bigly in order to actually stand a realistic chance of getting into the White House. And I'm sure the consultants for Donald Trump considered that when they advocated for JD Vance. So yeah, and then there's the most of the what do you call it, criticism for JD Vance or against JD Vance that is quite weird. I mean, the left, at least as of the moment of this recording, which is July 15, early in the morning on my end of the planet, I have yet to see any serious articulated criticism of JD Vance. I mean, most of their criticism has me looking at it or listening to it, and I'm like, yes, and? Like, you know, oh, JD Vance said something about the country being led by crazy cat ladies and diversity hires, and I'm like, yes, where's the lie? Oh my goodness, he hates women. No, not really. Oh, but he said mean things about Democrat women. Yes, but did he lie? So most of the criticism from the left is very superficial nonsense that convinces pretty much nobody. If anything, most of the very legitimate criticism that I've seen of JD Vance comes from the right. One of them being his economic ideas, which are mostly left-wing. And of course there is the criticism of him being less enthusiastic about Ukraine, let's put it this way, right? Now, as I discussed with Miguel in the occasional podcast, I'm very much unconcerned about that, largely because the geopolitics of the country is not shaped by the vice president. It is shaped quite a bit by the president, but then again, as I always recommend to other people as well, when you evaluate a politician, or even any person at this point really, don't look at what they say that much, and look at what they do. So, under Trump, the program for arming Ukraine started. Under Obama, Russia invaded Crimea. From that perspective, I'd rather be a little bit more optimistic. Besides, we've heard this movie before. Remember when Mike Pence was supposed to enslave women and turn the US into Handmaid's Tale? Yeah, that didn't happen either. Not that necessarily Mike Pence didn't have some of the ideas that the left accused him of, but because the vice president, generally speaking, doesn't hold that much of an influence. Usually the vice president is the tie-breaking vote when needed, or in the case of the Biden administration, a surrogate for the president when the president can't walk, which lately this has been happening quite a bit, so there's that too. But generally speaking, both the Democrats and the Republicans tend to select someone for VP that is more unacceptable for the other side, let's put it this way, precisely so they can be secure in their term. That was the rationale for picking Mike Pence. I'm sure this weighed into selecting JD Vance as well. I really don't believe that JD Vance is in the pocket of the Chinese and all sorts of that rhetoric that I've been seeing lately. I really don't think that. I also don't think he's a Putin apologist. I really don't. The worst thing that I've seen from him is that he said he doesn't care what happens to Ukraine one way or the other. Okay, fair enough. And so what? Again, he's a finger in the wind populist politician, and that kind of sentiment, as much as I disagree with it, is definitely very, very common in the Rust Belt, and particularly in Ohio, where he ran. I mean, he ran on that message and won. So, maybe he has a point from the perspective of his voters. Now, in a national campaign, you can't really go like that, just like the Democrats can't really go with California policy or California rhetoric in a national campaign. So I expect a lot of toning down of the rhetoric, so to speak, on that front, since everyone is now calling for a toning down of the rhetoric. By the way, I don't like that either. I think the right should not tone down the rhetoric at all, because accepting the premise that, oh my goodness, after this assassination attempt, maybe we should tone down the rhetoric a little bit. Accepting that premise means accepting the underlying assumption, namely the both-sideism kind of thing. And forgive me, I do not believe that this is a both-side kind of issue. No, it's not. It's not the Republicans who've been calling all Democrats a certain Austrian painter all day long. It's not the Republicans who've been calling for, yes, targeted assassination against either Biden or Obama, or at least not recently. Not that unhinged conservatives don't exist. Yes, they do, but they usually don't write for prominent conservative publications. They generally exist as quasi-anonymous trolls on the internet. So, when you'll see on Fox News the kind of degenerate headlines that we've been seeing on Washington Post or other places, then I can start taking the both-sideism kind of thing seriously. But until that happens, and I don't think it will happen anytime soon, the whole both-sideism thing has to be treated with the contempt that it deserves. So there's that. Speaking of Washington Post, there is a very nice article there called How Trump Can Make NATO Great Again. And it's the kind of piece that generally, I apologize for encouraging people to read Washington Post, but this one is actually pretty good. And it does start from a very correct premise. I mean, if geopolitics is your main concern, then most of the increase in defense spending all over the alliance is primarily an accomplishment of Trump. And it's not of Trump and Putin, let's face it. But it's really not an accomplishment of the Biden administration. That's just the reality. It wasn't the Biden administration that went around and nagged all of the allies to start spending more on their defense. It was President Trump, to be fair, and President Obama as well, but he got ignored for the most part, right? It was also President Trump that had a point when he tried to warn the German elites on their increased energy dependence on the Russian Federation. So, you know, again, from that perspective, maybe, just maybe, running with the default assumption that the Trump administration will mean an end to NATO and all sorts of these doomerist panic porn that is running around in various circles of the right, maybe doing that, maybe running with that kind of assumption is probably not a good idea. I'm just saying. Yeah. And then there is one argument that I find valid for JD Vance, is that he pisses off all the right people. He pisses off most of the libs, especially the shit libs. He pisses off the groypers, great. He pisses off the most enthusiastic flag people, and unfortunately that one is not available in English, but I made a video about a year ago from Ukraine about Vatniks and flag people, and where I made the case that the most egregious and annoying characters of both the pro-Russian side and the pro-Ukrainian side are more or less the same kind of personality, almost the same kind of people, and it's only a case of random that they fall on one side of the debate or the other. They're both very black and white type of thinking, and pretty much radicalized, and they kind of do radicalize themselves, so I'm not casting blame on anyone else other than the individuals involved. But what I'm saying is that pissing off the flag people is a positive, in my opinion, for JD Vance. But yeah, overall the appointment or the nomination or the picking of JD Vance is in that category of not great, not terrible, quite frankly. I mean, it could have been better, could have been far worse. I mean, it could have been Nikki Haley. Now that would have been pretty bad, in my opinion. So, you know, it's much ado about nothing. So yeah, I'm not buying into all of this panic porn concerning this nomination. As for the assassination attempt, well, good thing that he survived. Everything else is more or less predictable for a while. We'll see what happens in 4 months, whether the public remembers it and honors it or not. The expectation is that the public will. We'll see if that turns out to be true. Again, most of the times it is true, but there have been examples in history, and especially in US history, when that didn't happen. So if I were a Republican strategist at this point, I wouldn't just count on that. I would still be fighting as if I'm the minority. And this is something that the right has been struggling to learn for so many years. Namely that even when they found themselves in power or in the majority on some issue, they just assume that they would win because, well, they're in power and they're the majority. Whereas in reality, you should always fight as if you're the minority, preferably a very tiny minority. So, assume you're at 2% and work from there, regardless of whether the polls say that you're at 52 or 62 or even 72 for that matter. Because if you don't, then eventually your majority will still erode, regardless of whether you have a point or not. This is the same thing that the liberals do, especially the ones who actually understand politics. The good news for the Republicans is that there's fewer and fewer liberals who actually understand politics. I mean, some of the blue check marks on Twitter They were like, oh my goodness, the debate between Kamala Harris and JD Vance will be awesome because she'll mop the floor with him. Really? I mean, I understand that the last time Kamala Harris had to debate was 5 years ago, so in prehistory, in these times of low attention span, but come on, man. I don't have to like JD Vance to simply straight up assert that he'll run circles around her without much of a fuss. I mean, come on, it's just unreasonable to think otherwise. Kamala Harris is just no because no. Okay, let's put it this way. I suppose the only other thing that can happen is for the Democrats to change Biden and run with someone else. I don't know. There's still voices to say that it's still possible, and it is, legally speaking, definitely is. There are other voices who say, well, it's kind of too late now. We'll see what happens. But if nothing like that happens, yeah, the dynamic of the campaign at the very least changed. Let's put it this way. I don't think Trump won already, but he's definitely closer to becoming the next president of the United States, or to be re-elected, than he was on July the 12th, let's put it this way. Still, again, it doesn't change the fact that I went for a quick trip to Switzerland where I grabbed them by the pussy and then, you know, celebrated my legal birthday. And then right on my legal birthday, basically, there's an assassination attempt. And in the weekend that I wanted for myself, there's also the nomination of the VP. So I told you not to burn things while I'm awake. But of course, that happens all the time. All right, that's all I had to say. Thanks for watching. Send me to the cartels in Latin America, and I'll go back to editing Southeast Asia videos. Cheers.